thanks for joining me today. About a month ago I stated why I bought the VILTROX 16mm F1.8 lens and why I wasn't happy with my Nikon 17-35 f4 lens, and it's taken me a month to get the photos that I want to show you for this review, because I want to show you that this VILTROX 16mm F1.8 lens is not just a lens for astrophotographers or for landscape photographers who want to shoot very wide, or for storm chase who see a big storm coming their way and they want to catch that huge self cloud when it's just about on them to give them that wow photo, because this lens can be used for other purposes as well. You just have to know how to use an ultra wide angle lens like this lens. And before I go into the details of this lens and some of the features that it has that I find remarkable, for 900 AU dollars gets you this lens. Now the VILTROX 16mm is only available at the moment for the Sony mount or for the Nikon Z mount. Now let me show you some photos that I took over the last month. So this photo was taken just last night. This image was taken at f1.8. I've got this tree stump here on the right and this little grass bit just coming out with the Milky Way on top. This is classic astrophotography, and this is what this lens is all about. Now it's only about 2.5 meters away from this big tree trunks. You got to remember, in ultra wide you've got to be very close to your subject. This image was taken about 2 weeks ago, and this is another reason why. And this is why I wanted this lens, because a mate of mine has it and it is just fantastic. This image was taken at f8. I'd focused on the mangrove tree, which is quite a distance from me, but even the foreground is relatively sharp at f8, and I've got all these rocks and they're just pulling away from me, and I've got this tree in the distance and the stars in the background here. This is a classic example of how to use an ultra wide angle lens. Now I tested the VILTROX at various apertures from f1.8 all the way up to f22. This image here was taken at f18. Normally in landscape photography we say, like, we don't go past f16 at the best of time, but I want to show you that even at f18 this lens in the corners is relatively sharp and there is no chromatic aberration, and you can see that in this image here. Even though it's edited, I didn't find any chromatic aberration. But can you notice that I've got a rock in the foreground here? This image would have looked very different if that rock hadn't been there, and that rock was only about 1.5 meters in front of me. So when you're using a lens like this, remember to include a foreground subject. This image here with the rocks in the foreground and the sun setting in the background was taken at Bribie Island at f11. The only thing that I've done to this image is I've had to go into Photoshop and remove the base of the tripod, because I was so close to these rocks that the base of the tripod was showing. I have quite a bit of foreground impact, and then the yachts in the background with the sun setting looks really nice at f11. Now this image here, I'll go into detail after I talk about all the technical aspects of this lens. This image was taken only about 5 minutes after the image of the rocks, and I had this yacht there on the right hand side. I really want to capture all these beautiful clouds in the sky, perfect for an ultra wide angle lens. Now take a look at this image here of a Banksia flower. You wouldn't think about using an ultra wide angle lens for this type of photography. But imagine if you just had a standard lens or a 24-70 f2.8 lens and you focused on the flower, you would have very little depth of field. But because this is an ultra wide angle lens, even at f1.8 you get more depth of field. This is why people buy lenses like this for astrophotography, because at f1.8 or at f2 or even f2.8 you've got a huge amount of depth of field. I took this photo to show you that you could take all sorts of images with this. I was less than 40 centimeters away from this flower and it's beautiful. There's hardly any distortion. In the corners it's quite nice. Now take a look at these two images I took in portrait orientation. This one here was taken at f1.8, this one at f11. Not on a tripod, handheld, and the only real difference is at f11 you can see more of the background, and look in the top right hand corner, you can see that tree, it's just leaning away. That's typical distortion for ultra wide angle lenses. Distortion is very well controlled in this VILTROX lens. This is the f1.8 version of this Banksia flower. The full image is on the left, but look on the right here. I've cropped in to magnify the flower and it is so sharp. at f1.8. Some lenses, they will rate the lens at f1.8, but to get a very sharp photo, you have to stop the lens down to f2.2 or even f2.8. Not so with this lens. Now let's talk about some of the technicalities of this lens and why I feel it is so good. First off, when we turned on, it has a very nice little LCD screen here, and it tells you all about what the lens is doing. You have a manual aperture dial here. You can set it on A for auto and you can control it by the camera, or you can just override it and just choose the aperture that you want. Some people say that if you're touching the dial, it will click out from auto, but I found that I just don't put my hand anywhere near the aperture dial. There's no need for that. Has a very smooth focusing ring. I mean, smooth as, it's butter smooth. This is what I love about this lens here, and what my friend was telling me that is so good for astrophotography is that we have the autofocus switch here, so we have manual and auto. If I put it on manual, it has an F1 and an F2 button. The F2 button here can be programmed for 2 focusing points. So for astrophotography, if I'm photographing a subject that I've got a very strong foreground and the Milky Way in the background, I can set the first time I press the F2 button for my foreground subject, and then I can press the F1 button again and it will go to my second focus point. And that is such a good idea to have on a lens like this. And you can find how to do this in the instruction manual here. This video is not about showing you all how to set up this lens. I'm just wanting to review the lens and tell you all the functions that I like about and some of the functions that I don't like about, because there are a few details that I find that I don't like. Well, I have to put up with it. Now let's go back to the sunset photo with the yacht and the clouds in the background. Now when I was using this lens on this afternoon for the rocks and this image here, I had magnetic filters on, and this image here you can see that there is vignetting on the corners because I used 3 magnetic filters on there. I started using just the CPL filter, but I wanted to smooth out the water, so I put a 3-stop ND filter on, and it wasn't smooth enough, so I went ahead and put a 6-stop ND filter to give me around 9.5 stops of loss of exposure, so I would smooth out the exposure when I brought the exposure up. With 2 filters on, I didn't find any vignetting, but once I put the 3rd filter on, I found vignetting like you see in this image here, just in the corners. But when you look at the thickness of these 3 filters together, that's understandable. This is something that you just have to remember if you're stacking filters, that if you're stacking more than a couple of filters, you will have vignetting in the corners. Here is another thing that you have to remember about ultra wide angle lenses, and something that I found that this lens is amazing is that even when cropped to half the size, so from 24 megapixels, I cropped it down to 12, like going from an FX to a DX, I'm only getting 12 megapixels. The image was still sharp, but look at the amount of distortion that I had to apply to correct the distortion in this. And this is something with all ultra wide angle lenses. When you're shooting straight on like this, you're not going to get much distortion, but as soon as you tilt the lens up or tilt the lens down, you're going to get distortion. The more you tilt, either way, you are going to get more distortion. But you can see here how much I've cropped. Now, this is the final image and it looks great. So kudos to Viltrox for making a lens so good. Now, this is the first image that you saw, the Milky Way in the background. This was taken at f1.8. This image here is the raw file just brought into Adobe Lightroom, and here I've zoomed in and you can see that the trunk is quite sharp. There's hardly any digital noise, any grain in this image. If this had been my Nikon 17-35 f4, even at f4, this image would have looked like I'd taken a shotgun to it. Kudos to Viltrox again for creating such a sharp lens for this budget price. I want to show this image because here I used this F2 function here. I used the first time I pressed it for my foreground, which was our car, a Honda ZR-V, and then once I took the photo, I pressed the button again to set me infinity for the stars, and then I blended the 2 images in Adobe Photoshop. The first image with the car was taken at 90 seconds at f2.8, and the second image for the Milky Way was taken at 13 seconds at f2.8. So you can see this is a very good way of using this F2 button here. So all up, I found this lens for $900, just fantastic value. I would definitely recommend that if you're looking for an ultra wide angle lens for your Sony camera or for your Nikon Z camera, that this is a great lens, that you can use it just about for any type of photography. You just have to be mindful of how to use an ultra wide angle lens to get the most out of this lens. So if you enjoyed the video and found value in it, give it a big thumbs up. If you have any questions or feedback about this VILTROX 16mm F1.8, leave it in the comments. I'll answer your question. Enjoy your photography, and I'll see you next time.